Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. Finally, we reach Freedom Day, where government law enforced measures to control the spread of the CCP virus in England end. We'll be hearing from a barrister about the legality of lockdowns. And the UK has accused the Chinese regime of cyberattacks on Microsoft Exchange servers earlier this year. Freedom Day has arrived as government-dictated COVID-19 restrictions are removed in England. NTD's Neil Woodrow runs through the new status of the measures we have become accustomed to.
Monday's Freedom Day has finally arrived in England. After months of pandemic-related constraints, the country has finally reached the last step in the government's unlocking roadmap. Let's take a look at what this practically means. Social distancing is officially over. No more rule of 6 or 1 metre plus restrictions. People are no longer required by law to wear face coverings in certain settings, but the government expects and recommends masks to be worn in crowded enclosed spaces, such as public transport. Some operators, such as TfL, say masks must be worn as a condition of carriage. No mask, no travel. Others, like National Express, will not mandate masks. Supermarkets seem to be encouraging their wearing. Large events such as concerts, theatre and sports events are back. Organisers are being encouraged to use the NHS COVID pass to indicate an individual's COVID status. How about work? Should you go back to the office? The government is encouraging a gradual return. Some companies are already using hybrid working with the split between office and home. So even if you want to give a mask a miss, better take one with you just in case. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, London.
Are lockdowns lawful? Over the past 18 months, the nation's emergency measures have been legally challenged in the courts. NTD asks barrister Francis Hoare about some of the legal issues with lockdowns. Here's NTD's Jane Well with the story.
In March 2020, the government used the Public Health Act to implement wide-ranging emergency restrictions on our lives. Since then, England has had rolling lockdowns, 3 with varying levels of restrictions. The devolved nations took a similar approach. While the government said the roadmap is irreversible, future measures haven't been completely ruled out. Some lawyers have challenged the legality of the strict measures. Barrister Francis Hoare has argued that the Public Health Act doesn't grant powers to lockdown and the restrictions breach human rights.
This is not an act of Parliament that can give government the power to do more than much more restricted things. And secondly, that it breached rights to, for example, potentially liberty, but certainly private and family life, religious freedom, freedom of expression in a way by curtailing freedom of assembly, but expressly freedom of assembly and freedom of association, mainly being political rights of protest.
The case was unsuccessful at the Court of Appeal. Hoare, who's been involved in numerous legal challenges to the lockdown, believes the courts need to change their outlook. So is there any legal justification to continue lockdowns in the future, as a response to regional, national or global emergencies?
Well, I think my reaction to that is that really the difficulty with this goes all the way back to March when these were introduced. That it's not sufficient to say that they're against recommendations, because in fact they were not even considered. This is a kind of lawmaking that has not even been considered by any of those countries that have planned their reactions to pandemics. It happened in China. It was an extreme reaction that was considered to be extreme by almost every Western journalist who was there. It was extended to whole cities. And then suddenly Italy was the first Western country to impose this, which has links with China that are perhaps best called unsavoury, particularly in the area of Italy, Lombardy, that imposed this first. We had a whole area that was locked down, a term that means literally locking down a prison which is perhaps an appropriate term for what happened.
By the end of March 2020, at least 100 countries across the world were in different forms of lockdowns.
Could it happen again? Yes, undoubtedly it could. Would a legal challenge be successful? Well, the courts would probably need to change their outlook and attitude. But if they don't do that, they are putting aside the way that we've approached governance and laws and fundamental rights that we developed over hundreds of years. It's supposed to be our legacy to the world, the English common law, the parliamentary system, and in many other European countries, and obviously we're going over to the United States, which gets it from us. So that's supposed to be our heritage, and yet we've let it lightly be set aside and done so by copying a totalitarian communist regime. It's quite extraordinary.
Last week, Spain's top court ruled some of its strict pandemic measures as unconstitutional because they lacked parliamentary approval. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Finally, Freedom Day comes. But the Prime Minister can't enjoy his freedom after he was pinged by NHS Test and Trace. NTD's El Rhodes has the story.
On Monday, so-called Freedom Day in England, the Prime Minister is self-isolating at his official country residence. Boris Johnson's spokesman says he tested negative and is not displaying symptoms. The PM explains why the government lifted the remaining restrictions despite rising cases.
If we don't do it now, then we'll be opening up in the autumn, the winter months, when the virus has the advantage of the cold weather. We lose the precious fire break that we get with the school holidays. If we don't do it now, we've got to ask ourselves, when will we ever do it?
In a video posted Sunday afternoon, he urges people to be cautious.
Please, 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 be cautious. Go forward tomorrow into the next step with all the right prudence and respect for other people and the risks that the disease continues to present.
After Health Secretary Sajid Javid tested positive, the PM and Chancellor Rishi Sunak were both pinged and told to quarantine by NHS Test and Trace. But they both tried to get around the isolation requirement by joining a pilot scheme being trailed by the Cabinet Office and Number 10.
We did look briefly at the idea of us taking part in the pilot scheme, which allows people to test daily, but I think it's far more important that everybody sticks to the same rules, and that's why I'm going to be self-isolating until the 26th of July.
The official spokesman wouldn't confirm whether the PM's wife was also isolating, but he did state that the Chancellor is quarantining in his flat above 10 Downing Street. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
Businesses and unions have been warning the government the UK may face transport chaos and supermarket shortages if a large number of workers are pinged by the NHS app and have to isolate. NTD's Cos Temenes brings us the details.
Though most lockdown restrictions have been lifted, quarantine rules won't be relaxed for a month. Many workers have been forced to isolate after being pinged by the NHS Test and Trace app. Latest figures show more than 500,000 people in England and Wales were pinged by the app to isolate in the week up to July the 1st. People who have come into contact with someone who tested positive must isolate for 10 days. There are fears of transport problems because many workers have been told to stay at home. The worker shortage has already forced some pubs and shops to shut their doors. Pub giant Green King has been forced to shut 33 pubs in the past week. The Iceland supermarket chain has also been forced to close some stores, as 1,000 workers, or 4% of its workforce, are isolating. There are calls for the NHS app to be made less sensitive, but Vaccines Minister Nadim Zahawi suggested there's currently no plan to do so.
We review the app all the time. I think the important thing is that the clinical advice to people, if you've come into contact with someone with COVID, remains our priority through the app. That's the right thing to do. And then, of course, to make sure that we continue to review the quality of that detection radar system all the time.
Business groups have warned that quarantine rules are causing crippling staff shortages. CBI President Lord Billy Moria called on the government to immediately allow double-jabbed individuals not to self-isolate. Costa Menes, NTD News.
The director of the Oxford Vaccine Group says people who have been double jabbed can still become infected with the CCP virus. Professor Andrew Pollard noted the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccine as examples. He told BBC Radio 4's Today programme that both the Beta variant first detected in South Africa and the Delta variant originating from India are able to escape vaccine immunity to some extent. But he said the AstraZeneca vaccine is very similar to the Johnson & Johnson one, and he expects very high protection against hospitalization and death. The UK has accused the Chinese regime of being behind systematic cyber sabotage following a hacking attack which affected 250,000 servers around the world. NTD's Joy Duguid has the latest.
The UK, along with its Western allies, has accused the Chinese regime of being responsible for a massive hacking attack in early 2021. The attack targeted Microsoft Exchange servers and affected at least 30,000 organisations around the world. In a statement, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the attack by Chinese state-backed groups was part of a reckless but familiar pattern of behaviour. He said the Chinese government must end this systematic cyber sabotage and can expect to be held to account if it does not. Officials said the attack was highly likely to enable large-scale espionage, including acquiring personal information and intellectual property. The National Cybersecurity Centre said it's almost certain that the attacker was a Chinese state-backed actor. Tom Tugendhat, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Commons, commented that the cyber attack is an appalling demonstration of Beijing's readiness to steal a victory if it cannot win openly. He said the UK needs to use its powers to defend its interests rather than just standing aside. The United States also blamed the Chinese regime for being behind the cyber attacks. The European Union joined the UK in blaming the attacks on hackers based in China, though it did not explicitly link them to the Chinese state. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
Still to come, over 100,000 people across France protest against the government's latest anti-COVID-19 measures. That and more after the break. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.